Hi, I'm Alex. I'm here cooking for my friend Charlie. Today I'm going to be cooking for you a chili and prawn linguine with some roasted tomatoes. An excellent simple supper to impress. So what we're going to be using today, we've got some store-bought linguine. It's the dried version, so it's not kind of fresh egg pasta or anything like that, but it's not the most basic one either. We've got some plum tomatoes here, a bit of butter, some flat leaf parsley, we've got a lemon, a shallot and just a normal red chilli. We've got some nice big prawns here and then some garlic puree just to make your life much simpler. So in preparation, before I started, I've got all of my ingredients out, so I'm ready to go. And then I've also got a big pan of water, about 2/3 full, preheated oven to about 180 degrees C. I've got all the kind of dishes and cutting boards and everything out that I need to get going. So then as soon as I'm ready to start cooking, I can just get on with it as quickly as possible. Before I get going with all the prep of the veg, I'm just going to get my water on and turn the oven on so that's all ready to go. And then I'll come back and start prepping the tomatoes. Okay, so with the plum tomatoes here, I'm just going to halve them. They don't have to be, nice and even or anything like that. Just as you please, just nice and in half. So I've gone for plum tomatoes. It's personal preference, to be honest. You could easily use cherry tomatoes or even some of the kind of bigger heritage or heirloom tomatoes. It's completely up to you. I just think these are quite good for this particular dish, basically because they're small enough to be bite-sized. And obviously when you're eating pasta, you don't really want to have a knife and fork. So it just makes life a bit easier. Also, in this dish, sort of as a whole, with all dishes in fact, obviously you're going to try and make sure that you've got stuff that complements each other. So the garlic with the chilli, with the prawns, and then the parsley as well, and a bit of butter, and the tomatoes. You want something that all comes together to give you one final dish, rather than lots of little bits and pieces that don't really amalgamate together properly. So now for the tomatoes, we're going to get this dish, a bit of olive oil and salt, ready to put them in the oven. So really, really simple. You just chuck them all into this dish. And then a nice drizzle of olive oil over the top, not too much. If you wanted to, you could put some other herbs on top of here, but because we're doing with the prawns and the parsley already, I probably wouldn't go crazy with too many other herbs this time round. But if you're doing it with another dish, you could maybe use some rosemary or something like that, would go really well. So it's a kind of good pinch of salt on there. Then these are ready to go in the oven. And they're probably going to be cooking for the rest of the time that we're prepping everything else. So next I'm going to be chopping my shallot. So as you can see, I've already taken the base off there. And then now I just cut it straight down the middle in half like that. Make it easier to peel. So I'm using shallots here. It's a bit more of a sort of, I'd say, intense flavour than onions perhaps. And also purely just size-wise, I wouldn't need a whole onion in this. Shallots just work perfectly, both flavour-wise, and they're quite practical. And it's a bit different, if you're cooking for someone to impress them, rather than just saying an onion, the shallot sounds infinitely better. I'm going to be dicing these shallots, and because they're much smaller than onions, this is why I'm using this small knife. So to dice, you sort of take these cuts into the shallot like this, and as sort of as narrow intervals as you can, because you want some really small cubes here, but you also want them to be even, which is always important in cooking, because if things are even, they cook at the same rate, which just makes your life much easier. So I've done cuts this way, and then I've gone in with the knife once this way, so that now when I cut down like this, we end up with these nice cubes of shallots. So now that we've chopped the shallots, we're going to cut this lemon in half. All we want from it is the juice later on, so it's just so that it's ready to go when we need it later. And then we're going to do the chilli. So whenever you're using a chilli, depends on how much you like your spice, but I would say it's always very important when you first cut into it, just to take the top off, get a little bit on your finger, and just put it on your tongue. I mean, these really are not hot, but you are sometimes surprised when you pick up a chilli and all of a sudden you've put the whole thing in with the seeds, and then it is far hotter than you were expecting. With this one, just for the sake of texture, I am going to take the seeds out. So I've taken the top off, and then I'm going to cut it down the length, like this, and then again into quarters. And then we can just easily pull all the seeds and this kind of white pith as well, which contains a lot of the heat. It's not just the seeds that contain the heat. So when you're chopping chilies, unless your knife is super sharp, always cut them with the skin side down, because the knife just goes through them much easier like that, as opposed to, I mean, this knife is quite sharp, but just the skin gives a lot more resistance. So chop them that way up, make your life a bit easier. And you're just going to want to do one of these rolling chops like this. If you can't do that, that's fine, but it just makes your life a bit easier. And you're just taking off thin shreds as you go along. Again, because you've chopped the shallots so small, you don't want to then end up with huge chunks of chili. You want everything roughly the same size, again, because of cooking times. Our chili's now done. And finally, for the prep, the last thing we're going to do is just chop up some parsley so it's ready to be kind of put on at the end. With soft herbs like this, you don't want to put them in too early, as they will wilt and you won't get much of the sort of flavour or colour left at the end. So with herbs like parsley, you can absolutely use the stems, but I don't. In this dish, I don't really want the big chunks of stem. There's absolutely nothing wrong with them. If you want to chuck them in, or if you can't be bothered to pick it off like this, that's absolutely fine. So the reason I'm using parsley for this dish is, parsley is just one of those traditional herbs that goes well with seafood. I mean, it's been used for a very long time for a very good reason, because it does complement stuff like prawns very well. It won't be too cut out by the chili. You'll still be able to taste the parsley there, and it will still benefit the dish. So I've got sort of a small handful of parsley here, and when you're chopping herbs in general, you just sort of gather them all up as much as you can until you've got them all kind of rolled up nice in almost like a tight little cigar. And then again, you're going to do that rolling chop that we used on the chili. Chopped it roughly like that. We're going to run over it with a cross chop. So you put your fingers on the top of the front of the blade there, hand at the back here, and then you just rock the knife over the herbs just to give them a bit more of a chop. I'm just going to quickly check on the tomatoes, see how they're getting on. They are looking pretty good. What I might do now actually, so I've still got to just boil the pasta, so I'm just going to turn these off for now. They'll stay quite happily in the oven there until we need them later on. Next off, now that we've done all of our prep, the tomatoes are in the oven, the water's boiling, we're going to chuck the pasta in, so that's starting to cook whilst we're doing the rest of this. Then we'll start sweating the shallots, add the chilies, add the prawns, add the butter, and start building up that sauce. And we're going to use some of the water from the pasta at the end of that to kind of thicken the sauce and just give it a bit more body. And then we're all ready to serve with just a fresh squeeze of lemon at the end. So now that we've got our water at a rolling boil, which is quite important when you're cooking pasta, we're going to get the pasta in. And for two people, you want to use around a third of the pack of, so it's 500 grams of pasta, so around a third of that. And then when you're putting in pasta like linguine or spaghetti, just a nice easy little tip for you, if you hold it like this and then twist both hands, when you put it into the water, it all falls around like that, and it will gradually pull itself into the water and save you having to mess around trying to push it in as it goes along. So you can leave that there for now. Then we're going to get this pan on here, getting it hot. We don't want it too hot because we're going to be putting a bit of butter in there, which we don't want to burn. So now that that's lit, grab ourselves some butter, just a small amount, don't need tons in there. And we're also going to put some olive oil in. And the reason we put oil and butter is that butter on its own might start to burn a bit, but with the olive oil, it'll just stop that from happening too much. We don't want tons. And we will be adding a little bit more butter at the end to sort of bring the sauce together. So we're going to start off with the shallots. Once this pan's hot, we're going to chuck those in. And then once they've sweated down a bit, we'll add the chilies and then the prawns just to bring them up to temperature. And then we're going to add a bit of garlic puree. Really close to the end, we're going to put a squeeze of lemon in and a bit of the parsley as well. And then we'll mix it all together. With the pasta, now that that's sort of come down, as you can see, without having to give it too much attention, it is always good to give pasta a bit of a stir once you've just put it in, just so it stops it sticking together. And that's also why it's so important to have it on a rolling boil, because those bubbles physically moving through it stop it all clumping together, which you really don't want with pasta. So just give that a quick stir. Okay, now our pan is nice and hot. Make sure you've got the oil and butter all nicely spread around. We're going to chuck shallots in, get them going. And you don't want the temperature too high on the shallots. You're not trying to caramelise them, you're just trying to sweat them down, make them translucent. So if it's too hot, they will start to caramelise. So just keep an eye on the heat. If it is too much, just adjust, turn it down a little bit. Once the shallots have started going, I'm going to get some of the garlic puree, and we're going to add about a teaspoon of that. You don't want to add the garlic too early as well, because that's quite easy to burn. So once the shallots rather have started going, we'll get that garlic puree in as well. So as you can see, the shallots are now starting to sort of, they're not colouring, but they're starting to go a bit softer. So they're not far off. Our pasta's still going over here quite happily. Give that another stir. And then to the shallots we're going to add our bits of chilli. Get those going. And the chilli, other than just being really delicious in this dish particularly, it does give it a bit of colour, which never hurts, especially when you're trying to impress someone. So now we're going to add the prawns. Now they don't want to go in too early. Obviously these are pre-cooked prawns, so we're just heating them through, making them safe to eat and everything else. So we're not trying to cook them, we're just heating them up. So they don't take too long at all. Chuck those in, give the pan a bit of a zhuzh, get that all together. And you're just going to have to trust me here, but it smells amazing. So we're doing well. So when you're cooking pasta, it's always really important to make sure that you taste it when you think it's nearly ready. Often the packets will say how long it's going to take on it, but taste it a couple of minutes before, because pasta is very easy to take over. So just get a little piece and just see roughly where you're at. Because you still want to have a bit of bite to the pasta, you don't want it completely mushy. So we're not far off. Our prawns are still going well. So I'm just going to make sure I've got everything I need to finish off the prawns here. So I'm going to take a spoonful of water out of the pasta to get that starchy water to add to the sauce. I'm also going to make sure I've got my lemon and parsley ready to go in as well. So now that we're getting close to being completely done, we've still got to do the sauce there, and the pasta's nearly done. We're just going to take the tomatoes out of the oven. There we go, they're looking absolutely wonderful. So we can just chuck these into the sauce. One of the last additions once we've kind of made the sauce into the sauce. So we'll just leave them there for now. So this starchy water is really important when you're cooking pasta. It makes the sauce much thicker and a sauce, as opposed to just sort of some pan juices. And you're essentially using this to deglaze the pan that you've been cooking the prawns in. So get some of that in there, give it a bit of a zhuzh round, and then we're going to drain the pasta. So now that we've drained the pasta, get that back there, get ourselves ready to go. So our sauce is going well. So we're just going to add a tiny bit more butter just to finish it off. Another small knob. And we're going to give ourselves a bit of a squeeze of lemon. Just use your hands, make sure you catch all the seeds. Okay, and now that we're pretty much there with the sauce, one of the last things we're going to add is this parsley. Bit of that in there. And our tomatoes. go. So this is us pretty much done now that we've got all of the stuff together in here. And now's the time to see how thick your sauce is. You want it to coat the pasta, but you don't want it too runny. I think we're about good here. If you can see, you scrape along the bottom of the pan, it doesn't all rush back together. So about there is where we want. So we're good to go. So we turn the heat off there. And then with a pasta dish like this where you're using, you've made a pan sauce, you want to add either the pasta to the sauce or the sauce to the pasta, just so it all gets nice and coated. So we're going to do it this way, as this pan is much bigger. So get all that in there. So now that we're all mixed together with the sauce and the pasta here, it's looking amazing. We're just going to get it plated up and we're good to go. Okay, so now we're ready to plate. Let's grab a plate, something to put our hot pan on, around the table. Bring that over. And then with pasta, quite a good little trick. You can either use a carving fork or some tongs like this. Generous portion. And then when you get to the plate, just give it a little twist, just to give it a bit of height. And then you want to go back, grab some of the good stuff at the bottom. Get some prawns on top there. Some of the tomatoes and chili as well, if you can. And if you've got a bit more parsley, sprinkle a little bit more of that over the top as well. So there we are, all done. Chef's perks, of course, I get to try it first. Well, it was absolutely brilliant, if I do say so myself. So thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe at My Friend Charlie. And if you've enjoyed today's video, please feel free to leave some comments below. But we'll see you next time. Thanks.